I'm really, really happy to be joined here today by Mary Kent, who's here to talk to us around open source intelligence techniques and how they can be used to protect students and universities from potential adversarial incidents. Mary, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for joining us. I'm really happy that you're here. And I think this is going to be a really interesting webinar. And I think this will be a slightly different hint on content that we've had previously. So I think there'll be a lot that we can all take away from this, particularly around things like physical security and I guess pre and post incident responses as well.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here to talk about critical incidents on campus and kind of the aftermath and risk assessments that can be conducted to help keep a campus safe.
Amazing. So I understand you have some slides for us today, correct?
Yes, I do. So I'm covering the possible risks to a campus after a critical incident and how to observe online communications and search for potential threats to campus safety. So a little bit of background on me, because most people probably will never have heard of me or my program, but I am the director of the Open Source Intelligence Center at Utah Valley University. So my background, I've been in the military, I've worked with law enforcement, and I've been doing intel analysis work for probably a decade or more, specializing in organized crime, terrorism, human trafficking, things like that. And my job currently as the director is to train and educate students to be intelligence analysts, to do the work that I'm going to be showing today. We publish research, we have internships. I'm still an intel analyst, so I kind of fit into that pracademic group where I'm an academic and a practitioner. But this is not to advertise my program, but to emphasize the importance of education and training. I'm going to be providing some examples of things that people have identified online that they believe is in relation to a critical incident, and how misidentification can make the situation worse. It can be a problem. And so when we're doing work like this, when we're looking at threats to campus, we want to make sure that we are trained and educated in open source intelligence analysis so that we're doing things right. For example, so everyone kind of knows what I'm talking about, during a recent critical incident, an image from the news was put into an AI program to enhance it, to help people better identify who the threat was. And AI changed the image so much that the person did not look the same anymore, but it got posted all over the internet. And other individuals were identified as this possible suspect, but it was incorrect. But their information was published online, and therefore it was a risk to them because people started to think that they were involved in a campus threat. So education and training in this stuff is very important, and hopefully people will get that from the presentation today. Identifying the risks. There's a couple of definitions I want to go through first, just so we're all on the same page. This is how I define open source. Okay, so any open information available without the use of a password or hacking or any other circumvention of security. Now, when we grab information online, it's just that, information. It's the analysis part that turns it into intelligence. So those are the definitions that I use. Anything I suggest here or anything I've done for these risk assessments, it's always been passive. We don't interact with people online. We are simply observing. We're looking for information rather than trying to talk to people or elicit information. This is all about just observing. One thing I have to cover, and this is every time I talk about open source, we have to cover the right to privacy. Before you conduct a risk assessment, in the aftermath of any kind of incident, this incident could be a bomb threat, a shooting, a vehicle ramming. I mean, it could be anything. But before you do that, you have to know the rules of your organization. So if you're doing this for law enforcement, if you're doing this for a university or for a private company, You need to know the social media use rules, rules for reporting, security policies. You just have to be sure that you're respecting people's right to privacy. When we look at information online, we're not targeting people. We're not saying that what they have said online, true or not, is a threat. What we're doing is trying to get an idea of what people are talking about and how those ideas might lead to a risk to a university campus. If you're ever unsure about how to protect privacy and follow these rules, UC Berkeley in California put together the Berkeley Protocol. It's an outstanding document. It covers digital open source investigations. And as you can see there, it talks about professional principles, legal frameworks, security, the investigation process. All these steps are critical when trying to identify threats after a mass incident. Let's identify a threat first. A threat is an adversary that has intent and capability. So for someone to be a threat, they have to have the capability. If we go online, we'll see a lot of hate speech. We'll see verbal threats, which should be taken seriously. But a true threat to a campus in this instant is someone who has the intent and the ability to compromise a university system. I talk about telling my students to think ahead. And what I mean is when we're looking at information online, we may see something that looks like it could be a threat, but we have to think 3 to 5 steps ahead. Is this going to turn into a threat? If we have someone saying something fairly innocuous, could it lead to a threat in the future? And that's what we have to do. An adversary is just a bad actor, someone who is threatening to compromise the interests of, in this case, a campus, the mission of the campus, or is trying to reveal sensitive information, right? So when we're looking at stuff for risk assessments, we're not actually identifying adversaries per se. We're identifying information that might be a risk to the school, and identifying that information may eventually lead to the identification of an adversary. And I have examples for all of this so we can kind of walk through it. Critical information, this is just details about activities that an adversary can exploit. So we'll talk about campus holding rallies or protests. What could be exploited with something like that? What is the risk in holding a memorial or a rally after a critical incident? So here are the concerns. After a critical incident, after a bomb threat, after a mass shooting, people are going to want to know what happened. They're going to have questions. They're going to come to campus. They may want to get access to that area. They'll fly drones to get a better view of the area where the incident happened. There may be memorials and vigils. There are going to be rumors, and these rumors will cause fear and hate and blame. And then, of course, there's the disruption of campus operations and any appearance of vulnerability. People are going to take advantage of this. And at times they are well-meaning in attempting to help the situation, but honestly, more often it actually results in harm. So let me show you some risk examples here, because I've said a lot, but let's kind of put it into context. April 2025, Florida State University. There was a shooting. 2 university employees were killed and 6 wounded. It happened in and around their student union building. Okay, so this is in Tallahassee, Florida. Going online, looking at what people were posting after this incident happened, there was a lot of fault finding. People, for some reason, they want to find someone to blame. You would think it'd be pretty simple to blame the shooter, the driver, the person who put the bomb on campus, but they feel like they have to blame more than that. So this information right here, this individual posted that the shooter, who was identified, that they were part of the Republican Party. Okay. Now, whether or not this information is accurate, whether or not it's true, unless you dig into the background of this, you may not know. They did put a link here so you could check it for yourself. But the fact that the individual was part of the Republican Party had nothing to do with the incident on campus. So here's where we have our risk assessors think 3 to 5 steps ahead. If people are upset that this individual is part of the Republican Party, how is that a threat? This post in and of itself isn't. This is not a problem. The individual who posted this, they can freely do so. That's not an issue. But if something like this gets picked up and it continues and more people get upset that they were part of the Republican Party and they start posting information about campus clubs that are Republican supported, things like that, then we start getting into the realm of risk. If we start publishing information about clubs and memberships and who on campus is a Republican, then we're starting to give out information of individuals who have nothing to do with the critical incident. This is what happens at a lot of these incidences. They just want to find more people to blame than the actual individual who committed the crime.
Do you find that's also a case of just confirmation bias as well, where someone, like you mentioned, like the AI enhancement leading to a false
Yes.
identification? So it's like we enhance the image, we've done a
Mhm.
facial, like I guess like a facial recognition search. Oh, it must be that person because that's our thing. That's exactly what I'm looking for, rather than the question of, well, who is that individual? Where are they from? Do the events seem to align with what they're alleged to have done? Like, and is there anything that would lead you down that path to, I guess, affirm those beliefs rather than stopping and questioning whether or not, just because the facial recognition search says, oh yeah, that face that you've enhanced with AI looks like this individual?
Absolutely. Yeah. So when individuals are pointing out people to blame or organizations to blame, really they're telling you more about themselves than they are the incident. They're telling you that they have perhaps have something against the Republican Party if they're spreading hate. There's another example further on where someone posts that the shooter looks like they're Muslim. That is just spreading their own bias. That is spreading their own beliefs against a particular religion or against a particular race. So it really does tell you more about the person than it does tell you about the incident.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In this particular post, these individuals tell you about themselves that they support open carry with weapons. So this particular shooting, the area where it happened was a gun-free zone. No one was allowed to carry a weapon, whether or not they had a permit to do so. It was a gun-free zone. So the individuals here are upset that someone used a gun to kill people in a gun-free zone, and they feel that you should be able to carry guns in order to protect yourself. Again, on its own, it's not a threat to a campus. But if you have people who feel this way and strongly enough that they're willing to carry weapons to campus as a protection, you now have a larger number of students on a campus carrying weapons. We don't know if they are trained to use that weapon. We don't know in what situation they would decide to use it. There's also the idea of causing fear and concern if people openly carry on campus after a shooting. Suddenly we have guns all over the place. That's going to cause a lot of emotional strain and fear on the students who are attending that campus. So again, this is an example of thinking 3 to 5 steps ahead. On its own, it's not an issue. But if we start having people carrying guns to campus, that becomes a problem. Let's take a look at another example. The University of Virginia. So this was in 2022, Charlottesville. The shooter killed 3 people and 2 others were injured. I found an interesting post after this particular event that goes into this idea of fault finding. If you look on the right, the person who posted this said that you has had 598 mass shootings. No other wealthy rule of law country has daily mass shootings. Okay. If you look at the countries listed there, I want to point out particularly Syria. Now, when I think of rule of law countries, I don't exactly pick out Syria as one of those, but okay, they've got Syria listed there. It's clear this individual isn't thinking about war, isn't thinking about infighting between groups within the country of Syria. They're just thinking about mass shootings by their own definition. This plays into the idea that threats to a university don't necessarily have to make sense. With recent experiences, individuals were saying that at a recent shooting, the quad area was shaped like a menorah, and therefore Israel had to be somehow involved in the shooting. It doesn't make sense. Looking at a quad and seeing a particular shape doesn't mean that an organization, a country, a religion of any kind is involved in a critical incident. But people will grab onto that. Most of the time, individuals are pretty smart and they can say, okay, that doesn't really make any kind of sense. But unfortunately, there's still a lot of people out there who will grasp onto even the craziest of conspiracy theories and run with them, and they will actually get traction. And once these ideas get traction, you get a lot of other ideas that start branching off of it, and they can go further and further away from the truth. So we have to monitor what people are talking about so we can understand who is being drawn into the fray, what information is being published, and what people are talking about. It is a chance to spread hate. So you asked earlier, if this is confirmation bias. And I talked about this is an opportunity. People take it as an opportunity, I should say, for individuals to spread their own personal beliefs. This isn't necessarily because people believe there's a connection between these groups and the threat, but it reflects their own biases, and the threat gives them an outlet to express that. So after this particular shooting in Virginia, they had an image of the shooter that was posted in the news. You can see there on the right, someone posted, "Notice the Muslim beard." The individual just had a beard. That was it. But this person had their own bias. The individual was African American, and you had a lot of individuals who posted about, well, that's obvious. Of course, it was an African American person because of their own personal beliefs against African Americans. They were simply spreading their own version of hate, of bias, of racism. And people will catch on to that. And so with something like this, after a critical incident, if you have clubs or individuals on campus who meet any of the requirements these individuals have for looking like a Muslim, possibly being a left-winger or a right-winger politically, again, if those people are identified and their information is published online, that's a problem. If clubs on campus have events, say you've got a club that's celebrating Juneteenth, right? That's you have a group of African Americans coming together to celebrate Juneteenth. If there are individuals speaking like this online, you want to make sure that an activity like that is protected so we don't have any other counter meetings or counter protests or anything like that. People just use a critical incident to spread their own version of events and to spread their hate. And we have to make sure that we're monitoring chat like this to ensure that they're actually not going to move this talk into action. One of the biggest issues I found after a critical incident is self-styled investigators. Just because you know how to Google does not mean you know how to investigate. I have encountered many self-styled investigators who believe that they can determine better what happened in an incident than the mass of investigators with a local police department, a state intelligence agency, the federal government. People are inclined to find the truth for themselves. They're inclined to believe that there are going to be law enforcement cover-ups, government cover-ups. These self-styled investigators will come to a college campus to conduct their investigations. They will fly drones over the campus. They will attempt to talk to or interview students, staff, faculty, university police department. They will fly drones over the campus. They will sometimes try to recreate the situation just to have something to post on their social media. Not actually planting a bomb or anything like that, but trying to recreate the incident as part of their investigation. This is a major issue to universities because you're disrupting the university. First of all, you're disrupting operations. You're spreading misinformation because you're interviewing individuals who may have no knowledge whatsoever of the incident itself. You have images of students, videos of students and staff who may not have authorized it getting out online. And again, people will take advantage of that. They look in the background. They look for people that may not be involved to blame. There's one incident where it was said anyone wearing maroon is associated with a certain special forces military group, and they may have been involved. That was the only information provided. And so in the images of the event, there were plenty of people who had clothes on that were maroon colored. So now you have this massive social media, self-styled investigators and others trying to look for the identities of anybody wearing maroon at that incident. That's a huge problem. They had nothing to do with the incident, but because of the color of clothing they wore, suddenly their information may be published online. That's a major issue. We also had, I've experienced professors' information published online. Individuals they thought were involved in a critical incident. And they didn't stop at just professor information. They actually went on to their social media and found pictures of their family. They identified the names of their kids and where their kids worked and where their kids lived. This is again reiterating the thinking 3 to 5 steps ahead. If somebody says these people might be involved, you got to think ahead to the risk that's presenting to that individual and their families. So,
Do you find that would interfere in an investigation as well, potentially?
100%.
Because sometimes you have that
yes.
spread of misinformation, but somebody physically arriving on a scene where a crime has happened and then effectively interfering and stepping all over the place, potentially in the aftermath of something quite serious as well.
Absolutely. If a crime scene is still considered a crime scene, if you have people trying to trample all over that, that doesn't cause a problem for evidence for law enforcement. Afterwards, these risk assessments, the ones that I do, I have sent to law enforcement. So they will investigate all of these threats. So you're taking up their time with all these false leads and things like that when they could be focusing on more accurate evidence for the crime. So it slows down an investigation. It takes up more of the law enforcement's time. And then it takes more time for the overall investigation to be resolved. So yeah, it does definitely disrupt an investigation at all levels, local and federal. When we search for content after a critical incident, you need to combine different types of keywords. So if you go onto social media like X will have a lot of posts after a critical incident. In order to search for these types of posts, you have to get creative with the keywords that you use. So for instance, you could tie in the name of the university with the name of the individual identified as the bomber or the shooter. You could type in the event name that occurred during the threat and then type in the word protest or vigil or rally. Honestly, this is something you just have to play with. You have to try different words, different combinations to find out which ones are going to get you the information you're looking for. And as you search for that information, you'll actually start identifying individuals who talk a lot about the incident. As they talk about the incident, you'll see more posts and you'll get to know these. I would call them incident influencers, individuals that are posting a lot about the critical incident and getting a lot of shares and likes. So they're reaching a broad audience. I would say check your traditional social media for all of this. People will be very vocal on Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. But don't forget the non-traditional social media platforms like Twitch and Telegram and Truth Social. Most of the time, the majority of your information on a possible threat or risk to a campus is going to be found on traditional social media. But non-traditional may have a bit more, how do I say this, might have a bit more information, and people tend to be more vocal about their biases, about their opinions of the incident on platforms such as Discord and Truth Social. They're much more open on those than they are on traditional social media. So I would say check both, but the majority is going to be found on traditional social media platforms.
Would
The
you
bet,
consider
yeah,
platforms like 4chan like a non-traditional social media site?
you know, in all of the investigations and assessments I've done, not a lot of information has been found on 4chan. There are plenty of individuals who will either post or spread manifestos from active shooters on areas like 4chan or post video, but those are more after the incident. There are enough risks on traditional social media that I haven't quite found a use for platforms or forums like 4chan. But certainly that is something that could be on the radar as one of those non-traditional social media sites. The best tips I've learned when you are looking for those conversations that could lead to threats to a campus after a critical incident is when you find a post that discusses the incident, that talks about someone's biases or a self-styled investigator, check the comments. People will really open up and start talking in the comments. And by following those comments, you can find other individuals who might be spreading misinformation as well. You also want to follow the conversation. So if someone is talking about coming to campus and conducting their own investigation, you follow that conversation so that you know, when is this person planning on coming to campus? Are they intending on breaking into anything? Are they trying to access any restricted areas? Are they planning on interviewing students, right? Interviewing students you would think isn't on its own a negative thing, but you are causing harm to mental and emotional health, especially if they've just experienced a critical incident on campus, if they were actually at the event. You don't want individuals going around campus trying to talk to your students. Then you look for the frequent posters, okay? So people will post a lot. They may not get too many likes. They may not get too many shares, but they're obviously invested in the topic. They're posting a lot about it. Those individuals you want to kind of follow to see if eventually their posts do gain traction. Because when something gains traction online, it gains it immediately, absolutely quickly. In one recent incident, I was assisting Utah State University with a threat assessment, a risk assessment. And one of their departments, it was claimed that an individual involved in the critical incident was part of their department or was a student within their department. Absolutely untrue. But someone got a hold of it, a frequent poster got a hold of it, and then it got into the realm of an influencer. And within maybe a couple of hours, it had over 7 million views. This was a video, 7 million views, saying that this suspect in a critical incident was part of this department. And that led to the publishing of staff, the publishing of their family, their publishing of their kids and their locations and things like that. So you have to look for those frequent posters to see when that topic or when that post or information is going to take off. Also, check multiple accounts. Influencers have many accounts across a lot of different platforms. If you find somebody on TikTok, they're probably going to have a YouTube, they're going to have an Instagram. So make sure you're linking all of these channels together. Most often, they will post the same information on each channel. But Instagram is, photo-based, whereas YouTube is video-based. So they're going to be presenting different pieces of mixed media, and they may add information in one that they didn't have in another. So make sure you're checking for multiple accounts. And then, of course, find those influencers. Once they pick up on a topic, once they pick up on an idea, like maroon shirts, that's going to cause a major issue because it's going to spread far faster than your average social media user. One way I absolutely love to use is you can create a Google custom search. Going from social media page to social media page to social media page to search for information can be a lot, especially if you have a lot of individuals talking about a critical incident. For my part, when I do risk assessments, I will have other staff help me. I have a team of trained students who will help me. But if you don't have that, it is very time consuming to look for this information. And while people want to rely on AI to help them with this stuff, it is not a good idea. As for an AI story, I had an individual who was attempting to identify staff within a university, and they asked AI to give them a list. The list they got, none of those people worked for the university. We couldn't even identify if they were real people or not. So AI is good for perhaps looking for resources to utilize for open source tools, but not good for finding information as we've discussed here. But if you create a Google custom search, you can actually add sites to this custom search that you want to look for. So I have a social media GCS or Google custom search. On it, I look at Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram. I look at Telegram, Twitch, Discord, a whole list of traditional and non-traditional social media sites. Once this GCS is created, all you have to do is take your keywords that you've been kind of mix and matching to find the best ones, take those keywords, put it into your custom search, and the results will only come back from those websites that you have added. So the social media ones, TikTok, Snapchat, all of that. And it makes it easier to see across different platforms what people are talking about. This is just one of many resources that can be used, but it's a really useful one to try and narrow your search to specific sites and save a little bit of time. When you create a risk assessment, I actually made my own templates for these, but here's what I found is valuable. You want a summary of findings. You want to be able to read that first paragraph and people will understand what's going on. You do need to note your data sources as well. As an OSINT analyst, you want to make sure you note where you found the information, links to the information, because things can be deleted online quite easily. You don't have to name all of your sources, but name the ones you use the most or find the most data on. And then the rest, you can say, various news sites or various other social media sites. Notable campus and activity events. After a critical incident, eventually campus is going to start operating as normal. So you're going to have club events, you're going to have concerts and graduations and club meetings, things like that. This is where you want to, it's not just necessarily a list of stuff going on the campus. You need to think about the type of event. Does it relate to the critical incident? Will it draw a lot of people? Is it a controversial event? Those are the things you want to put under the notable campus activity events. That's why I put notable on my risk assessment, because there are other things happening, but they may not draw any type of attention. And lastly, recommendations. I always tell my students that if you find a problem, that's great. Bring it up, but also maybe come with some solutions as well. It's important that you provide some answers, not just all problems. If you have a controversial campus event, provide recommendations for safety and continued event monitoring. If there's a concerning trend of incident blaming online, tell your audience for this risk or threat assessment that you think it should be monitored still, or share concerns of where the rumor could lead. Give them some next steps. It's important to know your audience and ensure that you're tailoring your risk assessment to their needs. So I provide a lot of risk assessments to law enforcement. So I tailor what I write to law enforcement. If I was doing a risk assessment for a campus community at large, there's information I wouldn't put in there. I would change the way I listed information. I wouldn't necessarily put my data sources. I wouldn't put any links to anything. So one group may have more of a need to know than another. So be sure that you know your audience. You're not revealing anything sensitive. You know the policies for OSINT work within your organization, and you're not releasing any private information. What you're trying to do here is not add to the problem, but it's finding individuals who may cause issue or organizations who may cause issues, and letting people know that, hey, this is what's being talked about, this is what's going on, and these are the possible risks and threats that have been identified. So that's kind of my presentation on risk assessments. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
No, thank you. That was really, really interesting. I think that last point you made there around how you present the information, effectively
Mm-hmm.
like understanding your audience and what your audience needs. I think that's a lesson that I think anyone can take away, regardless of context of what
Mm-hmm.
they're investigating. I know I've spoken to people who deal with like financial services organizations, and they don't want to read a 60-page report in a PDF. They would like, like a 1 to 2 minute video summary or an audio summary, which, I think for a lot of more traditional intelligence analysts is a bit unusual, to
Mm-hmm.
put it politely, but is also quite, I guess, as we move with the times and the attention economy, etc. I see that actually that's something that does make sense in how you present data, especially if somebody doesn't necessarily need to know every single web page that you visited or
Right.
the exact content that was on that page. If they only need to know the key points and the answer to the intelligence question, then that should be more than sufficient. But one thing I wanted to ask specifically whilst you were talking there was the actual like workflow, like in the wake of, I guess, an incident. I guess, does your workflow start at social media, or do you start with like the initial news reports, or is it something different? And then like, how do you sort of go from that like initial seed point
Right.
to where each of these other parts of the investigation fit in?
If it's a campus where I'm not a professor, so I haven't been there and experienced it, um, I do a cursory review of news reports. Um, and I try to look at multiple types of news agencies. So we're talking national news agencies, then looking at local as well, just so I know the details of the event. Has the person involved been arrested? Are they still at large? What evidence has law enforcement presented? Um, like I was talking about the image that law enforcement presented at the one event. Um, they submitted that to try and get help from the public in identifying that person. If law enforcement has published that information, I want to know that so I can kind of reverse search those images and those ideas in order to find those threads where people start talking about this information. After that, social media really is the go-to for this type of information. Um, because kind of like a spider web, you'll have a central starting point, but it's going to kind of expand from there. So once I have the major details of the case, I continue to check up on that to see if there have been any updates in that information. But news agencies will tend to um, grasp onto things as well. They're more careful, they take more time to do the research. But what I read within the news, I do um, have to take with a grain of salt, just to make sure that I'm not um, automatically believing everything that's posted by news agencies, unless it comes directly from the investigating agency. So that is how I start, and then I move into social media using keywords that I have pulled from news articles, pulled from, let's say, law enforcement press conferences. I start there. And then as I learn what people are talking about, I will add new keywords that they have been using to continue to follow the conversation.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I guess as well, do your investigations ever venture beyond, I guess, like that physical realm? Because I saw one of the slides you had a bunch of keywords, and a lot of those seemed quite cyber focused. So I was wondering, if do you do like cyber led investigations as a result as well
Yes.
from these? I guess in my mind that would be like in the wake of a threat of cyber attack or something along those lines.
hmm So I have a colleague who runs our um, cyber program. And when we have an incident where the doxing has been involved, if staff or faculties begin getting threats via email, that's when we start moving into that cyber investigation. Um, there have been individuals who have tried to hack into university systems to identify details of an investigation, or possibly emails discussing the incident before, during, or after. And so that part is actually the cyber aspect, where we're dealing with people who are trying to hack to get information, um, and not just information on the investigation, but just information on the school in general that they intend on publishing.
Makes sense. I guess, and also a threat of like extortion or blackmail would then be sort of front and center of minds as well.
Yes, if there are if they find what they deem as conversations or individuals who might be controversial, then yeah, whether it makes sense or not, they may try and do something like that.
Bruce. And in terms of, I guess, like your OSINT workflow, so social media is quite a big part of that. You mentioned like the Google custom search engines. I was wondering, like, if as and when you then, I guess, in the event of an incident and you're looking for, like, I guess, the individuals involved, how far down that rabbit hole do you tend to go? Is it like a full, I guess, personal interest led investigation? We'll find their social media, we'll look to identify their motivations, their what they've posted. And would it be like that, I guess, that real deep dive there, or do you get to like a certain point in that chain where you then would stop and pass that over to law enforcement to continue?
It's a good question. I think with all open source investigations, you have to find that stopping point before you just keep going down the rabbit hole, because there's so many places you could go with that, so many websites and things. So you do eventually have to find that stopping point. When looking for an individual involved in a critical incident, at some point you're going to find information just on their overall character, their hobbies, places they frequent. That's usually when I start providing that information to law enforcement, and I kind of let them guide me on where they want me to go from there. They have more information on I do, than I do, so they're not going to necessarily share everything they know. If I provide them information on, say, places frequented by the suspect, they may know something that I don't about those areas and come back and say, hey, can you look more into this location for me? And then I start going that direction. I try and provide law enforcement with information as early on as possible, so that I'm not going down rabbit holes that are unnecessary. I kind of let them guide me. If they're not able to guide me, if we don't really have any information, I just keep digging and passing along that information until something crops up that they're like, hey, I actually think this might be something. Go ahead and follow this particular lead. Um, if I just went on my own, I'm so curious, I would just kind of keep looking and keep looking and keep looking. Um, but I've actually just recently done some research. So I'm about to get my PhD this year, and it's talking about how individuals communicate online before, during, and after a crime has been committed. And what I've noticed with individuals who've committed a violent crime, they very rarely communicate any kind of violent intent online. Um, and then after an incident has occurred, there is a drop in all forms of communication online. Either that is because they have been caught and incarcerated, or because they're trying to hide their identity. So with violent crimes like this, when you're looking at an individual who's, set a bomb or committed a mass shooting, social media can be very tricky. So there might not be a lot of leads to follow because their activity is going to drop off significantly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess I'll finish the last question, one we always ask as well. Is there any particular tools or techniques that you're using at the moment that you find are bringing particularly valuable results versus something that you would have done previously?
I would say there's a gentleman named Michael Basil. He is an open source intelligence guru. Um, to me, he wrote the Bible on open source, but his website, Intel Techniques.
I think to most of us,
Yeah, his website has been incredibly useful. The Google custom search, incredibly useful, just because it allows you to search so many websites all at once. Those are the ones I really look for, is the ability to search them all at once. I've actually utilized the website uh, start.me and created a curated list of websites that I use most frequently. There are so many start.me pages out there. There are hundreds of thousands of open source tools and websites that you can use. I recommend starting your own curated list with the websites that you find the most useful for your focus area. So if you're focused on organized crime or terrorism, the country, the nation that you're in the US, the state that I'm in, create something curated like that. And that way you can kind of start that collection rather than going to multiple collections to use specific resources.
yeah, that makes sense. I think also having those like workflows where almost like a checkbox exercise of what do you need to do on each one, which to make sure
Yes.
then you don't forget a step in that process. But then I guess the flip side to that is you don't follow it religiously
hmm
because you still need to do the other bits and think outside the box a little bit. Otherwise, you are prone to miss things in some investigations as well.
Exactly. I mean, each website you use, you should evaluate it for, the quality and quantity of the content. And then I tell my students, you need to check at least 3 different websites to be looking at this information. So you're not relying on one piece of information. Each website might have something different. And then of course there's those one-off websites that provide just one piece of information, but it's something that you couldn't find anywhere else. So it's important to make sure you're evaluating those, using at least 3 data points to evaluate information and making sure you're validating it.
I think that's a really powerful point around, especially on data validation and I guess source corroboration as well, because in this day and age, we're very prone to finding information, like you said, on one source, especially on social media, where the point you mentioned, like, oh, if you seen that guy's beard, clearly, like, this is a Muslim attack, or, oh, this guy is clearly a left wing lunatic. And it's like
hmm
being able to corroborate your sources, verifying the information is definitely a potential, especially in those, like, it's like, yeah, those investigative influences that you've mentioned. I think, like, some of those core groundings in intelligence analysis are the things that often get missed because they're not very sexy compared to, oh, look what I found with this tool. Look at all these things I've now drawn on the box, and this is how exactly everything happened. It might all be make believe, but it looks nice. Ta-da.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to discount individuals who do find valuable information online, and it does lead the investigation in a good direction. But you have to be very, very careful what you grasp onto and what you publish.
Not for sure. For sure. And I think, and this is something I find myself preaching a lot. Um, especially to more junior analysts, is around the importance of those fundamental intelligence techniques and making sure that you're not just taking everything you read as gospel. And before you know it, you've got like the crime wall going crazy with
Hmm.
links to people or organizations or groups, and none of it makes any logical sense. So I think that's a really powerful point that I think you've really drawn out in the way that you approach things and the methodologies that you're presenting as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's an important aspect of an investigation, any investigation, open source or physical evidence.
No, for sure. Um, I guess last question for you. If anyone wanted to reach out and discuss this, either I guess in the education sector or beyond, I guess we saw your email on the slide. Is that the best way to contact you, or
Yes,
are you
absolutely.
available on any of those like social platforms?
I do have
Fantastic.
a profile on LinkedIn, but honestly, email's the quickest way to get a hold of me.
Yeah, we're all drowning in messages
Yeah.
for sure. Okay, great. But Mary, thank you so much for your time. That was really insightful and really valuable. I think the community is really going to enjoy that. And speaking of the community, our next in-person event is towards the end of July on the 29th in London. Tickets are available now if you want to come along and network with like-minded individuals in Canary Wharf, I think. And likewise, the Global OSINT Conference is taking place in London on the 5th of October, and tickets are available now on osint.uk. Mary, thanks again for your time. This was a really great conversation, and thank you for sharing your knowledge and your methodologies with the community.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.